Jean-Roch Coignet's memoirs offer a vivid account of his life as a soldier under Napoleon Bonaparte. The French just routed the Prussians at Ligny. Let's begin. The next day, June 17th, 1815, at 3 o'clock in the morning, orders were dispatched to move forward. By 7 o'clock, our columns had arrived. We had only the English before us at that hour. The Emperor sent an engineer officer to reconnoitre their position on the heights of Belle Alliance to see if they were fortified. Upon his return, he reported seeing nothing. Marshal Ney arrived and was reprimanded for not pursuing the English, as there were only sans-culottes at Quatre Bras. "Go, Marshal, seize the heights. They are backed near the woods. When I have news from Grouchy, I will give you the order to attack." The Marshal left, and the Emperor positioned himself on a height, near a chateau by the roadside. From there he could see his left wing, at the strongest point of the English army. He awaited news from Grouchy, but always in vain, and fretted. Finally, an officer found him near a chateau, and said to the Emperor, "We are losing precious time. I have not seen any Prussians on my route. They are not fighting." The Emperor was troubled by this news. I was called and ordered to go slightly to the right of the Brussels road to verify the English left wing, which was supported by the woods. I had to skirt the road due to a wide, deep ravine that I could not cross, and a knoll where the Guard's artillery was in battery. It must be said that we had been flooded with rain, and the ground was soaked. Our artillery could not manoeuvre. I passed near them, and when I was opposite this immense ravine, I saw columns of infantry massed tightly in its lower part. I went beyond it, moved slightly to the right, and arrived near an isolated hut, a short distance from the road. I stopped to look. On my right, I saw tall rye and their pieces in battery, but no one moved. I acted a bit boastful. I approached these tall rye fields and saw a mass of cavalry behind them. I had seen enough. It seems they did not like seeing me approach. They saluted me with 3 cannon shots. I returned to report to the Emperor that, on the right, their cavalry was hidden behind the rye, their infantry, masked by the ravine, that a battery had saluted me. The Emperor ordered an attack along the entire line, and Marshal Ney performed feats of courage and bravery. This intrepid marshal faced a formidable position. He could not cross it. At every moment he sent to the Emperor for reinforcements to finish it, he said. Finally, in the evening, he received cavalry that routed the English, but without decisive success. One more effort, and they would have been driven into the forest. Our centre was making progress. We had passed the hut, despite the grape shot falling in the ranks. We did not know the disasters that awaited us. An officer arrived from our right wing. He told the Emperor that our soldiers were retreating. "You are mistaken," he said. "It is Grouchy arriving." He sent out immediately in that direction to ascertain the truth. The officer returned and confirmed the news that he had seen a column of Prussians advancing rapidly on us, and that our soldiers were retreating. The Emperor immediately took other dispositions. By turning his army to the right, he reached this column, which was repelled. But an army, commanded by General Blücher, was arriving, while Grouchy was searching for it in the opposite direction. The centre of our army was weakened by this turn. The English could breathe. No reinforcements could be sent to Ney, who, the officers said, wanted to be killed. The Prussian army was in line. The junction was complete. We were outnumbered 2 or 3 to 1. It was impossible to hold. The Emperor, seeing himself overwhelmed, took his guard, moved forward to the centre of his army in tight columns, followed by all his staff. He had the battalions form squares. This manoeuvre completed, he urged his horse to enter the square commanded by Cambronne, but all his generals surrounded him. "What are you doing?" they cried. "Is it not enough for them to have the victory?" His intention was to get himself killed. Why did they not let him fulfill it? They would have spared him many sufferings, and at least we would have died at his side, but the high dignitaries who surrounded him were not ready to make such a sacrifice. However, I must say that he was surrounded by us and forced to withdraw. We had all the trouble in the world to get out. It was impossible to make our way through this crowd shaken by fear. It was much worse when we arrived at Genappe. The emperor tried to restore some order among the fugitives. His efforts were in vain. Soldiers of all corps and all arms, marching without order, collided, crushed each other in the streets of this small town, fleeing before the Prussian cavalry who were cheering behind them. Everyone wanted to cross the bridge over the Dial as quickly as possible. Everything was overturned. It was near midnight. Amidst this tumult, no voice could be heard. The emperor, convinced of his powerlessness, decided to let the torrent flow, certain it would stop by itself when day came. He sent several officers to Marshal Grouchy to announce the loss of the battle. The disorder lasted a considerable time. Nothing could calm them. They listened to no one. The cavalrymen blew their horses' brains out. The infantrymen did the same to avoid falling into the enemy's hands. Everyone was in a muddle. I found myself for the second time in a rout similar to that of Moscow. "We are betrayed," they cried. This great misfortune came from our right wing being crushed. The emperor did not see the disaster until he arrived at Genappe. The emperor left Genappe and headed for Charleroi, arriving between 4 and 5 o'clock in the morning. He gave orders for all his equipment to retreat to Laon, partly through Avesnes, partly through Philippeville, where he arrived around 10 o'clock. Officers were again sent to Marshal Grouchy with orders to move to Laon. The emperor stopped at the foot of the town. There he had a heated discussion with the generals admitted to his council. Some wanted him to stay with his army, others wanted him to leave immediately for Paris, and he told them, "You are making me do something foolish. My place is here." After he had given his orders and written his bulletin for Paris, an officer arrived announcing a column. The emperor sent to reconnoitre. It was the old guard returning in order from the battlefield. When the emperor learned this news, he no longer wanted to leave for Paris, but he was forced by the majority of the generals. An old cart had been prepared for him, and carts for his staff. One of his senior officers arrived, ordering Colonel Boissy to take command of the place and gather all the stragglers. The National Guard was arriving from all sides. Finally, the emperor presented himself in a large courtyard where we were anxiously waiting. He asked for a glass of wine. It was brought to him on a large platter. He drank it, then saluted us, and left. We were never to see him again. We remained in this courtyard without speaking to each other. We climbed this very steep hill in the deepest silence, annihilated by hunger and fatigue. Our poor horses struggled to climb, having run for 24 hours. Men and horses fell from exhaustion, not knowing what to do. No one paid any attention to us. We were very unhappy. A few brave soldiers who had not abandoned their weapons were gathered, as most had left them behind to escape, not following the roads and fleeing across the plains. The headquarters gathered, Count Montillon at its head. We left for Avesnes with our heads down. We arrived by forced marches at the forest of Villers-Cotterêts. At the exit of this large forest, we spent the night at a doctor's house. Count Montillon said to me, "My brave man, do not unsaddle your horses, for the enemy could surprise us during the night. I am sure they are pursuing us. We must not undress." I placed all our horses. Fortunately, I found hay in this house. The servants were confined to the stable, bridles in hand. I posted one on guard to alert the general and returned to him. After supper, I asked the general to take off his boots to rest. "No," he said. I pulled out a mattress. "Lie on this. You will rest better than on a chair. I will watch with the servants. Rest assured, I will alert you." At 3 in the morning, the Prussians attacked Villers-Cotterêts. They emerged from the main road, having cut to the right to trap us in the town. This is what saved us. They fell upon our park, and they made a terrible slaughter. At this noise, I had the horses bridled and led out, and ran to alert my general. "To horse, General! The enemy is in the town." This was where you could see alert servants. The horses arrived at the door as quickly as I did. The general descended the stairs and mounted his horse, as did I. "This way," he said. "Follow me." He took the left in a long alley along the forest and the beautiful plain. A 3-minute delay, and we would have been caught. 2 rifle shots behind us were platoons of infantry placing sentinels everywhere. When we reached the end of the great avenue, the general dismounted to catch his breath and deliberate. Then we left for Meaux. Desolation reigned everywhere. Our deserters arrived, most without weapons. It was heartbreaking to see. Meaux was so crowded with troops that we had to leave for Clay. There, we found the country deserted. All the inhabitants had moved out. It was as if the enemy had passed through. Everyone was returning to Paris with their most precious belongings. The roads were clogged with vehicles. They had turned everything upside down in their houses. The enemy could not have done more. We arrived at the gates of Paris through the Porte Saint-Denis. All the barriers were barricaded. The troops camped in the plain of Vertus and on the butte Saint-Chaumont. The headquarters was in the village of La Villette, where Marshal Davout established himself. He was the Minister of War, the General-in-Chief. He was everything. One could say he governed France. Our entire army was thus gathered north of Paris, in this plain of Vertus, where Marshal Grouchy arrived with his corps, which had not suffered. We were told he had 30,000 men. The grand headquarters was assembled at La Villette, near Marshal Davout. As I was quartermaster, I had the right to present myself every day to receive orders and attend the distributions. There I saw all the deputations arriving, generals and notables in civilian clothes. Great conferences were held day and night. I must say to the praise of the Parisians that we lacked nothing. They sent everything, even cervelas and white bread to the staff. In the morning, at 4 and 5 o'clock, I saw these brave National Guards climb the walls of the Paris enclosure, turn left from the village to avoid being stopped, and head to the line to fire at the Prussians. Every day I saw this movement. On June 29th or 30, I said to my servant, "Give my horse oats, saddle him. I'm going to see the National Guards." I left well armed. I had 2 pistols in the holsters. They were rifled. It took a mallet to load them, and they shot far. They had cost me 100 francs. On the terrain of this plain of Vertus, I had the Old Guard on my right and the National Guards on my left. I arrived near our last sentinels, who were in the front line, arms at the ready. I spoke to them. They were furious at their inaction. "No orders!" They said, "The National Guards are shooting, and we have our arms at the ready. We are betrayed, Captain. No, my children, you will receive orders. Be patient. But we are forbidden to shoot. Tell me, my brave soldiers, I would like to pass the line. I see over there a Prussian officer strutting about. I would like to give him a little lesson. If you allow me to pass, do not worry about me. I will not defect to the enemy. Go ahead, Captain." I see behind me 4 distinguished gentlemen who approach me. One of them comes near and says, "So, you come to the front line as an amateur? Like you, I suppose. That's true," he says. "You are well mounted, and so are you, sir." The other 3 move to the right. "What are you looking at?" he asks again. "On the Prussian line? It's that officer over there, making his horse prance. I would like to pay him a rather close visit. He displeases me. You cannot approach him without danger. I know my trade. I will make him leave his line and provoke him if possible. If he gets angry, he is mine. Please, sir, do not follow me. You would disrupt my manoeuvre. Rather, withdraw. Well, let's see that." I set off, determined. Reaching the middle of the 2 lines, he sees that I am heading towards him. He undoubtedly thinks that I am coming over to his side and leaves his line to meet me. 100 paces from his men, he stops and waits for me. When I am within range, I also stop, and drawing my pistol, I shoot a bullet near his ears. He gets angry and pursues me. I turn around. He no longer follows and returns. I then turn left and charge at him. Seeing me again, he comes towards me. I fire my second pistol shot. He gets angrier and charges at me. I turn around and flee. He pursues me halfway between the 2 lines furiously. I turn around and charge at him. He approaches and thrusts his sword at me. I deflect his sabre over his head, and with the same parry, I strike him in the face so hard that his nose meets his chin. He falls dead. I seize his horse and return proudly to my little soldiers who surround me. The fine gentleman who followed all my movements comes galloping up to me. "I am delighted," he says. "It's your business. You know what you're doing. This is not your first try. Please tell me your name." "Why, please?" "I have friends in Paris. I would like to share this action I have witnessed with them." "Which corps do you belong to?" "To the Emperor's General Staff." "What is your name?" "Coignet." "And your first names?" "Jean-Roch." "And your rank?" "Captain." He takes out his notebook and writes. He tells me his name. Boret or Bory. He moves to the right towards the Buttes Saint-Chaumont, where the old guard is located, and I return to the headquarters with my horse in hand, very proud of my capture. Everyone looks at me. An officer asks where this horse comes from. "It is a horse that deserted and came over to our side. I picked it up on the way." "Good catch," he says. Upon arriving at my lodging, I had oats given to my horses and checked my capture. I found a small saddlebag with fine linen and necessary items for an officer. I had the horse unsaddled and sold it. Having 3 was enough for me. I went to the headquarters to take on a bureaucratic air. I found many people near the marshal. Some were leaving, others were arriving. All night there were only conferences. The next day, July the 1st, we were ordered to move to the south of Paris, behind the Invalides, where the army gathered in good entrenchments. I went there after receiving orders from my general. He sent me with his aide-de-camp and his horses. "Go," he said. "Paris has surrendered. The enemy is going to take possession. Waste no time. All officers must leave Paris. You would be arrested. Go join the army gathering at the Barrière d'Enfer, and there you will receive orders to cross the Loire at Orléans." Upon arriving at the Barrière d'Enfer, where the army was gathered, I found Marshal Davout on foot, arms crossed, contemplating this beautiful army, shouting, "Forward!" He, silent, said nothing. He walked along the fortifications, deaf to the army's pleas to march on the enemy. Our soldiers wanted to advance on the enemy, who had crossed the Seine, part on Saint-Germain, the other on Versailles, while we only had to cross the Champ de Mars to reach the Bois de Boulogne. With our left wing on Versailles, not a single Prussian or Englishman would have remained before the fury of our soldiers. Marshal Davout did not know what course to take. He called the generals of the old guard and ordered General Dru to set an example for the army, saying he would follow his movement and depart immediately for Orléans. Our fate was thus decided. The old braves left without murmuring. The movement began, our right wing towards Tours and the left wing towards Orléans. The enemy immediately formed our rear guard, and they cruelly captured men rejoining their corps and stripped them, as well as the officers. At our first stage, they pressed us so closely that the army turned and fell upon their vanguard. We pursued them. They were no longer so insolent and followed us only from a distance. We arrived in Orléans without being pursued. We crossed the bridge over the Loire and established headquarters in a large suburb that was almost deserted. The inhabitants had returned to the city, and we lacked everything. Once settled, efforts were made to barricade the bridge in the middle with enormous posts and 2 gates to withstand a strong attack. Then, the head of the bridge was put into a defensive state, bristling with artillery pieces. We remained quiet for a few days. These 2 huge gates opened at will to fetch provisions. We had to go to the city to get them. We found a boarding house at the entrance of the main street, and every day the gates had to be opened. But this did not last long. The Grand Marshal was seen behind his batteries, arms behind his back, very worried. No one spoke to him. He was no longer the great warrior I had seen not long ago on the battlefield, so brilliant. All the officers avoided him. If he had wanted to, under the walls of Paris, he who was the master of France's destiny only had to draw his sword. One morning, as usual, we left at 9 o'clock to go to our boarding house for breakfast. The caterer arrives and tells us, "I cannot serve you. I have orders to be ready to receive the Allies who are at the gates and are about to enter. The authorities have handed them the keys to the city." At that moment, there is a shout, To the Cossacks! We left with empty stomachs. Barely in the street, we saw cavalry marching in battle order at a slow pace, and a huge crowd of people of all sexes, men and women. The sight was chilling. All the ladies, richly dressed, with small white flags in one hand and a white handkerchief in the other, formed the vanguard, shouting, "Long live our good allies!" But the crowd was pressed by this cavalry against the bridge and passed through our gates. Then the enemy posted sentinels. The gates closed, and everyone went home on either side of the fences. As for the white handkerchiefs and small flags, our soldiers seized them and arm in arm took them to their lodgings. Some husbands tried to oppose it, but the soldiers responded by slapping them. They had to submit to the law of the strongest, and the husbands crossed the Loire in boats to join their dear allies, as they called them. Their wives spent the night on our side. They had to return by boat. The marshal did not say a word. Everything went as well as possible. Sorrows and pleasures pass with time. We received orders to move headquarters to Bourges, and Marshal Davout settled there, but it did not last long. Not being Louis XVI's favourite, he was replaced by Marshal MacDonald, who took command of the Loire army. Davout went to submit to the king, but he was the first to be discharged. Marshal MacDonald arrived with a brilliant staff whose chief was Count Eylau, who had only one arm, and 2 aides-de-camp decorated with the Cross of St. Louis. I went daily to the marshal to receive his orders, and then to the post office to collect the dispatches. I always arrived late and found the marshal at the table. One of his aides-de-camp asked me for my packet of dispatches. "I do not know you," I said. "Tell the marshal that his quartermaster is waiting at the door, but the marshal is at the table. I tell you I do not know you." He went to report my resistance to the marshal. "Let him in." I went near him, hat in hand. He got up to receive his packet and said to me, "You know your service. You did well to respond this way to my aide-de-camp. I thank you, my brave man. This will not happen again. You will let him in every time he presents himself with my dispatches. He must deliver them only to me. Have you been to Russia?" "Everywhere, Marshal. I sometimes delivered dispatches from the Emperor to you." I emphasized this word, and his noble aides-de-camp looked at me. The Marshal continued, "This captain has seen war. What corps did you come from?" "The Old Guard, since 1803, after my 4 campaigns. "Very well," he said. "I will keep you close to me as long as necessary for your service." "And our letters," said the aides-de-camp and Count Eylau. "All your letters are in the packet." "I make my packet at the post office, and what belongs to the staff is under the marshal's cover." "And me, Captain," said the marshal's daughter. "Are there none for me?" "3, miss." "You must bring them to me every day, Papa. You will pay for all that." "Yes, dear, the captain will give me his bill, and I will pay it. The post arrives quite late." "At 5 o'clock." This was repeated every day in 1815. The army was disbanded and reformed into regiments bearing the name of each department. The one from Jena was commanded by the Marquis de Genappe, a perfect colonel. I had the opportunity to meet him in Auxerre. I was in charge of making all the daily distributions, and during the time I stayed in Bourges, I distributed 200,000 rations by rank. Often, I could only give half rations, so I needed gendarmes to maintain order. The marshal kept me close to him for as long as he could, but he was ordered to send me home on half pay. On January 1st, 1816, the marshal called for me. "You asked to speak to me?" "Yes, my brave man. I am forced to send you home on half pay. I sincerely regret making you leave, but I have received the order. I delayed it as long as possible." "Thank you, Marshal. If you want to join the Yonne depot and resume service, I will get you a grenadier company." "Thank you. I have matters to settle in Auxerre, and I have 3 horses I want to sell. I would like to go to Paris to sell them. I grant you that with pleasure. I only need permission for 15 days. My horses are valuable. I will sell them well only in Paris. You can leave from here. I would like to pass through Auxerre. You have full permission." I took my leave, said my goodbyes to him and Count Eylau. Upon leaving the palace, I thought, what lovely New Year's gifts. I will have to tighten my belt with half pay. I must say I never had anything but praise for the general's kindness. On January 4th, I left Bourges. On the 5th, I arrived in Auxerre with 3 fine horses. At the town hall, I took my lodging ticket for 5 days at the Faison, where I found a table d'hôte where the Marquis de Genappe took his meals. I was invited to his table for 3 francs per dinner. It was too expensive for my small budget. With 73 francs a month, I could not spend 90 francs on dinners, not counting my servant and my 3 horses. I could not continue and took all measures to economize. I wrote to my brother in Paris, asking him to send me 200 francs to feed my horses, telling him that as soon as they were sold, I would give him the money. I immediately received the 200 francs and left for Villefargeau to buy a cartload of hay, straw and oats, as the inn had ruined me. In 6 days, my 3 horses, my servant and I cost me 60 francs. I visited Carolus Montfort, an innkeeper next to my hotel, who offered his services. "Come stay with me," he said. "I will house you and your horses, and only ask for 60 francs a month. Your horses will be alone, and you will eat at the table d'hôte." "It's a deal," I said. "I will bring all the forage here. I remember you from 1804. You stayed with my father." "That's true, my friend. But 60 francs is tough. I only have 73 francs a month. You must dismiss your servant. My stable boy will groom your horses. For 3 francs a month you will be settled." "Thank you," I said. "I am satisfied." Thus, I was settled with this excellent man. On January 7th, 1816, I went to General Boudin. "General, here I am under your command again. Marshal MacDonald gave me a 15-day leave to go to Paris to sell my horses. I forbid you to leave Auxerre. But, General, I have permission. I repeat, I forbid you to leave the city. But, General, I have no fortune. How am I to feed them? That is not my concern. What should I do? Leave me alone. If you cannot sell them, shoot them." "No, General, I will not do that. They will eat until my old coat, and I will not harm them. I would rather give them to my friends." I took my leave and withdrew, very disheartened. But I did not boast about it, and kept absolute silence. Back at my lodging, I immediately dismissed my servant, but this was just the beginning. I did not suspect that I was under the surveillance of all the devotees of the old monarchy. Settled at Carolus Montfort's, I formed the nucleus of his table d'hôte. The Yonne regiment was quartered at the lunatic hospital, Porte de Paris. 16 or 17 officers came who arranged the pension price, and I became the dean of this table. I had to get to know these new arrivals. Among them was an old captain from long ago, with grey hair, who always sat opposite me at the table. I saw that he wanted to get to know me and was not at ease with these young officers. Among them were one named de Tourville, a sub-lieutenant from the bodyguards, and one named Saint-Léger, a former sergeant-major in the line who had gone to the king in Ghent. They boasted of the role they had played in Marshal Ney's affair. They bragged about having disguised themselves as veterans to shoot him in Luxembourg. I could not contain myself. I was ready to leap over the table. I restrained myself, thinking, "I will catch you soon." On Friday, Madame Carolus served us a dish of lentils as a vegetable. My antagonists were fuming. They wanted to take the dish and throw it out the window. I said softly to them, "Gentlemen, let's see what your old captain decides. I defer to him." The old captain tasted the lentils. "But, gentlemen, they are good. We do not want them." "Well," I said, "if I made you eat them candied in my stomach for 24 hours, what would you say? And if I made you walk around the town with a post-whip, does that not suit you? You will have to go through with it. You understood me, that's enough. I will wait for you under the elm." But I waited in vain. I was dealing with tin plates that cannot withstand the heat. The old captain shook my hand. I received an invitation to present myself every Sunday at the general's, to attend mass like my comrades, and then at the prefect's. It was the etiquette of the day. One had to be seen. As there were many officers, the general's salon was full. I formed the rear guard, staying in the antechamber. I was careful not to go bow. I had been too well received. Finally, after several Sundays, I was noticed by the general, who was standing with his back to the fire. Seeing me, he called, "Captain, come closer, my brave man." I approached, hat in hand. "What do you want from me, General?" "I am currently making a list to designate the officers who want to resume service. I have orders to name them. If you want, I will ensure you get a grenadier company. Thank you, General. Marshal MacDonald offered it to me, and I refused." All my comrades were silent. One was bolder, the gendarmerie captain Glachan, who said, "Look at this quartermaster who has returned covered in gold." Seeing myself addressed in this way, I stepped forward to the general, lifting my waistcoat. "Look, General, how I float in my clothes. Look at the gendarme who has 3 buttons on his coat that he cannot fasten, so fat he is. Come on, Captain. I do not know him. It is not for him to speak to me. Let him remember that." I returned home, suffocating with anger. I would have preferred to be in Russia again. At least, I had my enemies before me, while here they were everywhere in my country. That concludes the 15th part of this story. Thank you very much for listening. Please consider subscribing for more epic stories.